next fight, we've got another, interesting bout making the headline here, or I should say the main card, with Dusko Todorovic and Gregory Rodrigues. Now, Gregory Rodrigues is actually a guy that I really want to talk about because we're seeing him come into the UFC after a big performance in LFA. He's coming in as the champion. We saw him on a Dana White Contender Series fight where, if there was any fighter you would not want to play Rock'em Sock'em Robots with, it's probably Jordan Williams. He's such a forward and back type of fighter, can take a punch from pretty much a fire hydrant and seems to just keep pushing the pace till he breaks you. Now, if you look at the way, Nasruddin Imavov was able to deal with Jordan Williams, it was a lot more of the lateral movement. It was a lot more of the switching levels. It was a very technical battle. And not that Jordan Williams isn't a technical fighter, but it forced Jordan Williams to be more of a technical fighter. Because if you get into a brawling fight with Jordan Williams, we've seen the outcome. So Gregory Rodrigues pretty much got slept in that fight. And speaking of slept, Dusko Todorovic against Punahale Soriano, that's another one I'm willing to take a note because I really believe that Dusko Todorovic had a bit of a, all-around type of game, was coming in after facing some good competition. But Punahale Soriano was an undefeated fighter coming into a very, very tough fight. And man, that striking was insane. It was one of those fights where you even had the ref give him every opportunity in the world. I mean, that's Herb Dean's fault. I'm just kidding. But I mean, it really is one of those tough fights to kind of, look at after the fact and be like, man, it's crazy to go against Punahale Soriano ever again, right? That's what made me excited to watch him again. And now that makes you just think about Dusko Todorovic's ability to take a punch, take a beating, especially if it goes into the later rounds. I think Gregory Rodrigues is showing the ability to be a lot better of a striker than he's shown in the Dana White Contender Series. Even looking at the LFA fight, I felt like his hands were up a lot more, even when he threw his own kicks. He's coming from a camp with guys like Lyoto Machida, Anderson Silva. I don't know why I said Lyoto first, but that's where my head goes. But, I mean, such a good group of, Brazilian folklore and gods, if you will, and is bringing that all, around full circle in his next stint with the UFC. So I'm excited to see what he can do against a kid like Dusko Todorovic, who, like I said, you fight a guy like Daquan Townsend, you're able to prove yourself pretty well. But then you take on a guy like, Punahale Soriano, that striking and movement just caught you way off guard and you couldn't keep up. Punahale was just the much better overall athlete, in my opinion. Dusko Todorovic, in his own right, could have been, a very comparable MMA fighter, an MMA athlete, maybe a better one. But just the overall athleticism of Punahale Soriano in that fight was just so obvious. The quickness, the speed, the agility. I feel like agility is something we don't talk about enough in MMA, but that's what you get when a guy isn't just super fast, but he can move quick. Agility is something that we can really talk about, especially in the upper weight classes, because we see it from a few guys. And in this case, we talk about Dusko holding 100% takedown defense, but it's the competition's out there. Punahale Soriano was not looking to take anybody down. In fact, I think he called him back up at one point in that fight too. So for me, powerful shots, all that type of stuff are going to be so key for him. I think that if he had the ability to keep the punches straight, instead of looping, I think that a lot of guys are finding very, very, very good success now in just not fighting like a brawler, but being more technical about it. You see that with Rodrigues, right? I think that his strikes, going up the middle as opposed to looping, are not only keeping his defense down, but are allowing him to land very powerful check shots like jabs and things like that. Whereas right hook now is looking so good. And that's where I think that you're going to find that, a guy like Dusko Todorovic, who's now already coming off a big finish on the feet, this is a pretty interesting fight, even with it being on short notice, with Maki Pitolo pulling out of this fight. It's kind of interesting to see a guy who just won the LFA lightweight title is now coming into, middleweight title is now coming in to replace that fight. So where I think he has success, clearly footwork. I think that he should be able to land big. Funny enough, these guys are going to look fairly similar if they both come in bald. One guy's going to be Brazilian, one guy's going to be obviously European looking, but they do have very similar looks, so that should be fun to look at. But outside of that, I think the chins are going to be the most interesting to see who holds up the longest. If this becomes a really, really good boxing fight, expect someone to drop. I don't think either of these guys are going to be able to last. And when you consider that both these guys have been finished in the first round, and that's their main, most recent loss, it's what makes it exciting going into their next fight, especially when they're both strikers. So I'm actually going to give a bit of an edge to Rodrigues just because I think he's riding such a high, and he's been in training camp for basically a title fight. And right now he's going to have to go 3 rounds with a guy who, again, coming off his first loss of his career, but can also be a demoralizing one, which you don't really know how fighters recover from that. We just talked about Cody Garbrandt in the beginning, but let's take a quick look at these lines here for our boys Gregory and Dusko. And again, Dusko opens up at a -194, it looks like, and is now dropping closer to that -150, -160 range. I mean, let's take a look at what the weirdos at Bet365 are rolling with right now. And Dusko Todorovic is a +225 underdog right now. I mean, I'm curious to know what's happening at this point. I'm definitely recording this. Dusko Todorovic is currently a +225 dog on Bet365. And if you look at the opening lines and the current lines across the board, he is most certainly looking more like an average -150 fighter in this one. So, I mean, hopefully other people who are seeing this are seeing what the hell is going on, because if you're betting Rodrigues at -300, you have a serious problem on your hands, and I wish you the absolute best.